All right, guys, I know we may need to spread out for comfort level with the things that are going on around the world, around our neighborhood. So,
I don't know what you're talking about.
I was hearing that incidences of COVID and flu and all of that are up. So the nice thing is to have a big room where we can spread out and all of that. Yes, you want me to bring it in? So whoever did this must have thought Carol was really short. So there we go. Well, I am delighted to introduce y'all to somebody you already know better than I do, many of you, because I'm the newcomer to town. But Carol Harley is here tonight to talk with us about funeral planning. And Carol is, I learned that she and her husband are third generation Harley Funeral Home, and I just think that creates so much trust in the community. And I know that when I went for my very first time, which was a good time to go because I was not walking in grieving. I was walking in to meet Carol, and I just felt so at home and in your space and welcomed and cared for, just as somebody who was coming to meet you and plan for tonight. So I know that the families that come to you must sense that as well. I left my notes about Carol's background, so I'm sure she will share that with you. But I do know that she is on the museum board. She is a member of Greenwood Women Care and
Greenwood County Community Foundation Board.
Greenwood County Community Foundation Board. So just really investing in our community all around. So grateful for that. And a member at Main Street United Methodist Church. So good neighbor up the road to us. I wanted to share with you that I have adopted from First Presbyterian Church a form for funeral planning. That it is my hope that whenever you want to, if you're a member of Westminster, if you want to come help me know, your wishes, so that that's available when it's time for those to be shared with your family. I would love to sit down with you, and I have those forms here tonight if you want to take them home with you and just work over them at home, and then we can sit down together and share those. As I mentioned in my sharing of this event on Facebook, the days after someone has died are so very stressful. And I know that our brain does not work very well when it is grieving. And so the decisions are hard to make at that time. And so it's nice if your family can know ahead of time what your wishes are. So that's our hope for kind of thinking ahead and providing that care for your family as they make those plans for you. Or as you are making them for your family members. So if you want that for your family, we'd love to provide that for you. Well, I don't want to take any more time from Carol, because she has some great things and certainly a lot more expertise than I do.
Thank y'all so much for having me here. This is not my favorite place to be, behind the lectern. I'm a behind the scenes person, so we're just going to kind of be informal. I'm going to try to share some information that I hope will be helpful to you in making some plans for the future. And what I'm going to use, I've brought some handouts. I don't know if everybody got them, but there's a little book back there called Simply Speaking.
I'll grab it.
I'm just going to kind of run through this as my guide. I'm not going to read it or anything, but just to give me a base for how we're going to go from here. But as Caroline mentioned, I am from Greenwood. I'm a Greenwood native. I've been with Harley Funeral Home for 42 years and just love what I do. It's a place where God put me. It was not like a plan in my life. It was just where God placed me, and I have been ever since, and have loved what I do. Maybe not always what I do, but that I'm there to do it, and that I'm able to offer some comfort in going through a very, very tough time. Well, one of the first questions is, why do I need a funeral? And, you know, a lot of times I hear people say, oh, I don't want a funeral, you know, just cremate me, or just, you know, y'all don't have to do anything for me. But it's so important for the people that are left behind. We all know that a funeral, a way to remember that person, a time to remember that person that meant so much to us. And also I think, and all of us as Christians, it's a time for that reassurance of what, of the hope of Christ and where we're going. Just that, to have that opportunity to know that's what where we're going next, and that it's okay, you know, that we're okay. So, you know, in our life we celebrate all kinds of things, you know, weddings, birthdays, there's always celebrations. And mourning and grieving is a time to celebrate that person. So that's one of the reasons that we should get together and acknowledge that person's life and the fact that they've gone on. How do I go about planning my funeral? Well, there's lots of things to think about, a lot of choices that need to be made. Do you want to be buried, or do you want to be cremated? And sometimes people think, you know, I'm a cremation, that's easy, let's just do that. But there's still a lot of choices with cremation. Just because you choose cremation as the final disposition for your body does not mean that you can't have a funeral. You know, you can still choose even embalming and a body in a casket and have a full funeral. And then at the end, you just don't go to the cemetery, the body's cremated. And so that's, you know, something to think about. And then once you kind of know that, then that helps you decide other things that need to be decided. And y'all, please, if you have any questions at any point, please ask, because I want to answer the questions you might have in your mind. Let's see. But on that end, so you've got the option of, say you choose burial. Typically, in our part of the country, you're usually going to have a time of visitation. You're going to have a funeral service of some type, whether it's in the funeral home, a church, or in the cemetery in the graveside service. You know, you're going to have a time for just a private family time together. You're going to, so you've got decisions to make about picking out caskets, what cemetery you're going to be buried in, and you have that already been decided. There's requirements of the cemetery sometimes that require certain purchases, such as a vault. A vault is not required by law, but most perpetual care cemeteries are going to require that. So that's something, depending on where you're going, that's another choice that has to be made. If embalming is actually not required by law, but it can be something that's required by the funeral home if you're going to do some type of open casket public viewing. But if it's just going to be a private family time, that's not something that has to be done. So those are all things that you do have choices about. But part of with pre-planning, and that's mostly what we're talking about here, it's a time, it can be scary for some people, but most of the time when I sit down with families that are making arrangements for themselves, you know, when they go to leave, they say, well, that wasn't so hard. You know, I guess it's just the thought of it, that's what you're sitting down doing, is thinking about your funeral. But, you know, once we just sit down and talk about these things, we're just gathering information that's going to be needed later to prepare the death certificate, that's needed to make sure everything's still current. But, so we just gather all that information. One of the booklets that I left, back there, that y'all can take it in as you need. But this is one that gives you an opportunity to just go ahead and gather your thoughts. Because I think one of the biggest, this little booklet right here can be a big gift to your family if you don't do anything else, but just to write all this information down. This goes through the vital information that's needed, your thoughts about what your final wishes are, like I said, burial or cremation, what cemetery, wishes, and this is what Caroline kind of wants, is, you know, your favorite songs, scriptures, things like that that would actually be used for for the service itself. This one actually has a little place where you can write down some financial information, like where, you know, banks and stuff. This is not anything, of course, the funeral home wants, but it's just a guide for your family, to know where to look for things. Because that's one thing I think a lot of times I see is your family, you've either got one person making the decisions and they don't have any help, or you've got, you know, 5 children that all think they know the answers and all their answers are different, and if you've got things written down, it gives us a guide or them a guide to know what you wanted. And so that, to me, is the biggest gift of pre-planning, is just that your family knows what your wishes were, and they can hopefully carry those out like you wanted them. So, let's see. So if cremation is something, is what you're choosing, like I said, you still have the option for having a full funeral. You can have a memorial service where there is no body present. You can have a memorial service with cremated remains present. We can do burial of the cremated remains, or those can be kept or scattered. You know, there's just so many options when you're talking about cremation. One of the biggest things with cremation is, of course, it is a very final disposition. So there's very strict laws in South Carolina regarding cremation and who can authorize cremation. That an individual can pre-sign a cremation authorization themselves, and that gives us that's the authorization that we need to get the permit we need from the coroner to do cremation without other signatures at the time of death. But if that has not been done, then it's your next of kin that has to sign that authorization. So if you have a spouse, it would be the spouse, but if there's no spouse, it comes down to your children, and we're required to get a majority of the children to sign, or if it's no children and it's your siblings, we have to get the majority of the number of those siblings. So sometimes that can be very difficult. Sometimes that's the hardest part of our job is
So that's for permission to
cremate. Mm-hmm.
And I understood that you have to have a death certificate
Right.
signed and filed.
Yes, sir. Yeah, before we can do cremation, we have to have that authorization that has been signed by your family. We have to have the completed death certificate. There's a permit that's issued at all deaths, a transit permit that gives us permission to move that body from, say, the hospice house to the funeral home, or the hospital to the funeral home. All those papers have to be sent to the coroner, and the coroner gives the final permit that we can go forward with that cremation.
Carol, does the permission to cremate that's done, if you do it ahead of time, does it need to be done by an attorney?
No, ma'am. There's a form that South Carolina has that is a pre-need cremation authorization, and it's that you sign, and there's 2 witnesses, and then the funeral home accepts it. And that's something that can be done, and we can keep on file. Yes, sir.
Who do you contact for the death certificate, and is that online information or is it a paper copy?
So death certificates, when say death occurs at the hospital, like I said, the permit that we get to transport the body has the name of the physician that is to sign the death certificate. So we gather all the vital information from the family, and South Carolina DHEC works through the Department of Public Health now, it just recently changed. There's a death certificate, web-based death certificate. We go in and electronically input all that information, then we designate it to that physician that we've been told is going to sign it. Then that physician has 48 hours to sign it online, and then once he pins it, then it's automatically filed. So everything's electronic now. And then as soon as that's done, we get an email that says the death certificate's been completed and released, and then we go in and order the number of copies we need, and we can pick them up at the health department, usually within an hour. So that process, I was just talking to Dr. Todd about that process has become so much better than it used to be. That's one of the good things about the internet. Used to be we had the paper copy that we typed on the typewriter, and then we had to take it to the hospital or to the doctor's office or wherever, that paper copy, and then they called us when it was finished, and we went back and picked it up, and then we took it to the health department and it got filed, and it's much smoother and goes much quicker for the families now to be able to get those death certificates.
So the funeral home makes copies for whoever wants one in the family, or?
No, we get the certified copies all from the health department.
Okay.
They issue all the certified copies.
But if somebody 6 months later needs a copy,
If whatever they need it for,
yeah.
if a certified copy is not necessary, we can certainly make a photocopy because we keep a photocopy in our file. But if they need a certified copy for something, it has to be purchased from the health department again. And the funeral home that you use can get a copy of that death certificate for a year. And after a year, the individual has to go to the health department themselves to get it. They won't allow the funeral homes to get them after a year. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I work at Leaf with female offenders, and a lot of times they are next of kin. So the funeral home will fax me the information for them to sign. But I never had this occur, but in the event that they chose not to sign, what would?
Well, that's when our job gets really hard. When we have to, go through, sometimes even get probate court involved or something to, get somebody else appointed that tells us, okay, it's okay for this person to do it. We can't just decide, okay, it's, like I said, that's when it gets real complicated and can make things get drawn out. So what a lot of people, because we even have situations sometimes with people that have spouses that have separated for a number of years but never divorced and never had a legal separation. That can get kind of hairy because they're still legally married and there's no legal separation. But there is a order of who's kin, who's next in charge as part of the state South Carolina funeral law. So it says the spouse, if the spouse is not available, and it goes down to children, and then it goes down finally to like a person who exhibited care for the deceased. So it might be, the siblings haven't talked in 30 years, and then it's this cousin that's been taking care of them, and it just. But we still kind of have to get some kind of authorization from that person to say, I wash my hands of it, I don't want anything to do with it, and and then we keep falling down to we find the right person. But we just always, like I said, it's a very, very permanent kind of disposition, so we want to make sure that everybody that has any kind of authority knows about it and is aware, and lets us know that we can move forward with that. So it's always best. That's a grand thing about pre-planning, especially if you got some of these families that are a little dysfunctional and, be complicated. It's good to get all this done. Like I said, with the memorial service, again, that can be as elaborate as you want, or it can be as simple as you want. It can be, it can just be a few people gathering in a room. It can be in somebody's home. It can be in the grandest church in town. You know, you're not limited, and because cremation has been chosen, does not make anything less about that funeral or that person. They're remembering them is just as important as if you've got a casket doing a burial. So that's, I think, very important to note. That a lot of people just say cremation's easier, that's what I want, but you know, you need to do what you want, because everybody deserves to be remembered in whatever way they think is best.
Carol, when, say I do the planning guide, and I give it to my wife, you know, that I'm not this and that, there's no legal obligation for her to do that, it's just more a moral obligation.
Right, exactly. And that's what we're gonna get into, actually prepaying. That gets down to more of a legal obligation. Yeah, this is more, and you can even, you don't have to prepay. You can, if you want to bring this to your home, just for us to have on file, so your family doesn't have to dig it up later, that's fine. I don't want the pages, like I said, that if you fill out stuff out, your financial stuff, I don't want that. We just want the few pages that have to do with the vital information that's needed and some of your wishes. But yeah, just to bring that on file, and so that we have it, again, just so your family doesn't have to dig things up later, we can just pull a file. And then have, if you are going to bury them, you can go ahead and pick out a casket and things like that, that we can say this is what she wanted. But if it's not prepaid, you know, they may make different choices based on financial situation at that time. So,
Carol, I forgot to say at the beginning, and you and I were very, very clear about this, that Carol is here as a funeral director.
right.
And
exactly.
she's telling you things that all funeral homes will know.
Right, yes, exactly.
She is not saying.
No, I'm not, no. Exactly, no. I'm talking on funeral service in general, and how it is at any funeral home. Okay, so the next one is, are there benefits to setting aside funds ahead of time? So that's so you can prepay for your funeral. Most funeral homes are, well, I shouldn't say most, but yeah, most funeral homes are licensed where they can take your money ahead of time. Any money that's paid to the funeral home ahead of time is set aside in a pre-need trust account, which is regulated by the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs. We have to register, if you prepay with us or with any funeral home, we have to register that contract with the Department of Consumer Affairs, so they have a record that that's been done. The funds are set aside either in a bank trust account or in a pre-need policy, a funeral policy, just for that funeral. So all those funds are kept separate in an account for John Doe and Jane Doe, and they're not just in ABC funeral home account. They're set aside for that person. They are, if you prepay in full, most of the time the funeral home offers a guarantee, so that for the service charge, the casket, vault, merchandise, those things that you are paying for are guaranteed that they don't cost your family more at the time of death. Not to say, so I'm just going to do round numbers. if what you pay for today is $10,000, when your death occurs, everything would be refigured based on that day's cost, which might be $15,000. If there's $13,000 that has grown in the account, the funeral home's just gonna take a shortfall on that difference between what today's prices are and what's there. But if it has grown to $16,000, we're not required to give it back. But I can tell you, it never grows to $16,000. You know what interest rates are today. But we're guaranteeing you, your family doesn't pay more. The items that we can't guarantee are, flowers, obituary notices, cemetery stuff. We usually don't take cemetery stuff on a pre-need anyway. That's something like at Greenwood Memorial Gardens or Oak Brook, those are charges you pay to them. We certainly can't guarantee any of their charges. But those are the other usually little incidental things that we can't guarantee. We don't know what the index is going to be charging, in years to come. And so those things are not guaranteed, but it's a part of it. It's something you can go ahead and set aside. Let's see.
I noticed that you can rent a casket.
That's for cremation.
Oh, okay.
Right, yes.
Okay.
That's for, if you do choose cremation, what we call a full service cremation,
All right.
so it's the one we use, and I'm sure most funeral homes it's something similar, but it's the one we use is a wood casket, and so the interior, where you see the lining, the material, all that's lined. So let me back up just a second. South Carolina requires for cremation that the body be placed in some type of rigid container to go into the crematory, which 99% of the time is a cardboard box, because people don't care about picking out something different to go in the crematory. There are other options, and you can pay a lot for that, but anyway. So this casket is made where the end of it opens up, and basically a cardboard box goes in there with all the material enclosed. And so looking at it, it looks like a regular casket. But then when it's time to do the cremation, that's what comes out. So we use the shell again, but not the interior.
So that would be for a funeral where you have a viewing?
You're having a viewing, but then you're doing cremation afterwards.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Can you rent a grave?
Not in South Carolina. I think you knew that in Louisiana, can't you? Yeah, they don't do that around here.
You don't plan to be there very long?
Yeah, the rapture.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
It is.
Let's see, what else about okay, and so these contracts, now if you just say, you've got a couple $1,000 you just want to go ahead and put aside, we can set that aside in a trust account in a non-guaranteed contract. So we're not guaranteeing any of services or merchandise or anything. We're just setting aside some money that, you want to go ahead and get out of your account for whatever reason. And then either of those contracts can be either revocable or irrevocable. Revocable, of course, meaning that at any time in the future you wanted your money back, you just send us something in writing, say, I want to close this account, get my money back, we'll close that account, send it back to you with any interest that might have been earned. And then the irrevocable, after 30 days from the time the contract's signed, cannot be returned to you or anybody in your family. And that option is there, and that's part of what's back here a little bit, but we'll go ahead and talk about it now, is for people that are trying to qualify for any type of public assistance, like Medicaid, and so you hear about this a lot when people are going in a nursing home or something, and they need to spend down some funds that they have to qualify for Medicaid. Paying for your funeral is something you can do. You can legally use the money for, because you're going to need it, you're going to need it eventually. So, that way Medicaid, will not count those funds as an asset that you have if it's in an irrevocable trust. So that's, a lot of people, that's what we see lots of times when families are, you know, somebody's having to go into a nursing home and they've got a little bit more money than they need, than they can have to qualify, you know, because Medicaid won't let you have much. So that we see that a lot, but that's what helps, that's what irrevocable is for. So that's a guarantee to Medicaid that that's not funds they have access to. If it's a revocable trust and something you can cancel and get your money back, they can't look at it that way. And we just talked a little bit about the funding options. Like I said, we can, and it's usually up to the funeral home how we trust it. Most of the time we put it in a policy. And the reason for that is funds that we put into a pre-need burial trust at a bank, the person that they're set aside for has to pay taxes on the interest that's earned on those funds, although, like I said, it's not very much these days. Whereas a life insurance policy earns dividends, and that's not something that's counted, that's taxable to the individual. And of course, it's important to us to try to earn as much as we can, because if that account's going to sit there for, 10 or 20 years, we want it to try to keep up with inflation, because we are guaranteeing those services. So that's, but it just all builds up in that account until the time is needed for the funeral. Yeah, we just talked about Medicaid, so don't think anybody have any questions about that. Are there any veterans in here? Did anybody have any? Okay. There are a few benefits the VA provides for a veteran. They give a flag, of course, and that's something that your funeral home would make arrangements to have for you. Of course, they're usually eligible for a honors team to come and fold and present that flag. And again, that's something your funeral home can make arrangements for. They just need a copy of your DD 214 to take care of that. There's not a whole lot of monetary benefits. If a veteran is drawing a disability pension or dies in the VA facility, there are funeral allowances up to $2,000, but it's based on the person's level of disability. There's not just once you apply, they'll tell you exactly what, I think the minimum's $800 now that you get. But it is, and the reason I don't know 100% is because they no longer pay to the funeral home at all. It's only reimbursed to the person that pays the funeral expenses. So I never see those. We used to just automatically get a check for $600 or whatever, but we don't get that anymore. So the only time the funeral home receives any benefits or payments would be if the veteran is an unclaimed veteran, and then we can apply for, they'll provide so much towards a casket and things like that, but there's not a whole lot. Oh, and a marker for the grave is something that a veteran will be entitled to. And there's a couple options that you have for that.
Do they have I know there's a veteran cemetery up in Anderson. I mean, do they automatically are eligible for that?
Yes. Most any veteran would be eligible to go there, and they do. There's no charge. Well, yeah, there's no charge for the veteran, and I think it's a $300 charge for the spouse to be buried there. And they provide the vault, and of course the marker, grave opening. So the only thing you would be paying to your funeral home would be their service charge and the casket. So that is a benefit, that if somebody wanted to go to one of the veteran cemeteries or national cemetery. And we've got, like you mentioned, Dolly Cooper and Anderson, and then there's the National Cemetery in Florence and Beaufort are the ones in South Carolina. And Social Security. Don't count on Social Security to help with your funeral. The surviving spouse gets $255, and that's it. The end. And if there's a child under the age of 16, I believe it is, they may be eligible for something like that. And of course, spousal benefits as far as whichever spouse was drawing the larger amount of Social Security each month, that surviving spouse is going to get that larger amount of the two. But as far as funeral, like I said, the $255 is a one-time death benefit payable to the surviving spouse. But the funeral home is required to notify Social Security of the death, and that does stop any benefits from being received. So normally, if there's not a surviving spouse, there's nothing else that has to be done for Social Security. But if there's a surviving spouse, they have to make the phone call and get their benefit, check on what their benefit is.
Carol, do you educate people when they come to you about things like that? I mean, in that time?
Right.
So you would say something like, now you want to follow up with Social Security?
Right. We've got an information sheet that we give everybody and try to point out the things that they need to follow up with. Let's see. I think.
Carol, when a person can't afford anything.
That's the next thing that popped up here that I was fixing to mention. I'm hoping this brochure, that's what it told me. So there are, of course, people that can't afford funerals. They're not inexpensive. There are not any, sadly, there are no benefits, no type of programs locally that really help with funeral cost. We don't get any funds from county, state, or anything for indigent situations. So it's really up to the families to figure out options, to look at different funeral homes, compare prices, see what they can work out. There's a couple of, for anybody that might be interested in anatomical donation, there are programs through MUSC, the Georgia, what's it called now, Dr. Thompson? Georgia Medical, used to be University.
It used to be Medical College of Georgia, but I'm not sure what it is now.
Augusta Medical College or something like that. Anyway, it's changed the name. But there's programs like that. Those are things you have to do. MUSC you have to be pre-registered for. It's not, but there are, I don't think the one in Georgia, I don't think you have to pre-register, but they have to accept, that they can take a body. In most of those situations, cremation is done in the end and cremated remains are returned to the family.
They're going to take the body and deal with it from there on?
Yes, ma'am. Those are programs that they do science research and then do cremation. In Greenwood, we actually have, Piedmont Tech has a funeral service program here, and there's a small fee that they would take a body, that if a family agrees and signs for that, and then again, cremation would be done. What they do is practice embalming, the students practice embalming, but that is something that is available for indigent cases.
Well, at MUSC, all the medical students have to do their anatomy, I think. But at the end of it, I was so impressed that, the remains were cremated. And in one of the chapels on campus, they had a very moving memorial service.
Do they do that once a year or something?
As I remember.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
So.
But they will, if the family wants, they will send the cremated remains back to the family or they can be disposed of by the university.
Yeah. But I mean, they're very respectful,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so I thought that was, in several of our patients, you know, have, you know.
Right, well, some people, that's just what they want. That's their way of helping, is by giving their bodies for research. So it's not always a financial situation. I mean, I had a lady this week that they brought in, I mean, we didn't end up helping them at all. They did go through, I think in USC, but prostate insurance is big. You know, there was plenty of money. It wasn't a money thing. It was just what they wanted. So,
But like you said, the important thing is to pre-register.
pre-register, that's something you're interested in.
Trying to make arrangements.
Right,
You
yeah.
know, it's really.
I'm pretty sure MUSC does not take anyone that's not pre-registered. So that is something you have to think about ahead of time. And donating organs is another thing that we run across a lot, which is a wonderful program in South Carolina. It's called Sharing Hope. But you can still have any kind of funeral you want, whether it's a body present or cremation, it doesn't matter. We can take care of things after Sharing Hope has harvested whatever organs are agreed to be donated. So that's something that, you know, you feel led to do that. You know, don't let your choice of funeral determine that, because things can be taken care of. Yes, sir.
What are the trends that you're seeing among families about cremation, and what are their usual choices for disposition of the ashes or retention?
Cremation probably accounts for about half of the families we serve now. I would say the majority of them have a memorial service. And sometimes I don't know what the final disposition of the ashes is, but we do always encourage people to do something. You know, we very sadly, I had a situation one time where a house got foreclosed on, and when the company that went in to clean the house out, in the end they found some cremated remains. You know, and we had done the cremation for another funeral home. We did not handle the family, so we reached out to that funeral home for them to get in touch with the family members to get them. But it's best to deal with them now than the next generation, because when, you know, you just have them and then, you know, you pass away, then your children come in, it's like, what are we supposed to do with Aunt Dottie? You know, she's still sitting here. So we just encourage, whether you're going to do burial, scattering, do something, you know. And I, you know, a lot of people do want to keep them close, and that's fine. And we do see some people that will bury some cremated remains, like in the casket with the next person or whatever. You know, maybe one spouse was cremated, but the other one wanted to be buried, and they will bury the cremated remains with that spouse, and that's good. You know, as long as everybody knows that's what your plans are. But yeah, just definitely do encourage you.
What are the legal issues related to, can I sprinkle my wife's ashes in the garden, or wherever I want?
So yes, you can scatter on private property. You can scatter cremated remains wherever. If you choose a public place, just don't tell me. Don't ask me. You do what you're gonna do. I know, you know, there are burials at sea, or even services that do take cremated remains out to be scattered at sea, legally. You know, so there are services that can do that and get the proper paperwork needed to do that. If you are going to scatter in a body of water, please open the container and scatter them. had another situation one time where somehow the ex-wife was the one that ended up with the cremated remains, and she just went out to the bridge and tossed them over into the lake, the whole box. And when they were retrieved by a fisherman, he took them to the sheriff's department, and because our name was still visible, they got brought back to us. Yeah. So, yeah, just open the container. And,
Well, do you remember Frank Addy? You know, when he was probate judge, he spoke about,
oh gosh.
wills and things like that. And there was one that, a will where the man who was a retired Navy veteran wanted his wife to go to Charleston and rent one of their ships and then be able to scatter the remains over the fantail in Charleston Harbor. Well, she went down there, and it was going to be so expensive to do anything like that. What she did was she rented a rowboat up at Lake Secession, and he was rowing, scattered his ashes, all the while singing "Anchors Away." And now that I live on Lake Secession, I don't swallow the water.
I would, assuming that I die here, would probably be, like to have a service here, and, but be buried, my husband is buried in Charleston, and so we need to do, and I probably would like to be cremated, so, my vision of it was, assuming I could get permission from where he's buried, to do that, to, attach to, put next to his,
Right.
whatever it is.
Is he buried or in a mausoleum?
He's buried.
Okay.
But, it has a flag or whatever it is.
The marker, right?
Yeah, a marker. And so so my thought was to have a chart or something and attach it to that and let that be the, where I would be. So the ashes would be cremated.
That would be the cemetery to answer that
Just
question.
that, okay.
Right, because that would be their rule, whatever their rule might be.
Yeah.
But typically,
Transporting is not an issue.
right, yeah, no, that can be handled easily. But yeah, the cemetery would just have to agree to something like that. They typically have, a lot of times in the perpetual care cemeteries,
This is
like a church cemetery or something, yeah, they may not have any objection, but you just have to get the cemetery committee to say that it's okay. In a perpetual care cemetery, you can typically bury cremated, either a casket and cremated remains, or two sets of cremated remains in one grave space. But typically there are charges for that second, they call it second right of interment, so using that grave space a second time. But it certainly can be done if you've got situations like that. Or, I've heard that people have taken cremated remains to cemeteries and maybe just scattered them. But again, that's not something I know.
Don't tell me.
Let's see. Is there anything else y'all can think? There's a question in this book: can a person be buried on private property? Which is not something we hear of a whole lot. We've had several, people that own a lot of acreage and wanted to be buried on their farm or whatever. And you certainly can. The biggest requirement, let's see, this is what it says here. Yeah, no law in South Carolina prohibiting that, but we'd have to get approval from DHEC, because you have to be a certain number of feet away from, or yard, whatever, from a public water source. So like a well or whatever, so you've got to keep that in mind if private property is something that you're thinking about.
I wonder if there's reporting requirements. Like if I bury mom in the backyard and then I sell the house, wouldn't I have to tell the new owners there's some bodies in the backyard?
And that, right. Yes. And that is why you typically wouldn't want to do that on just in your backyard.
Right.
Right. Like if you got a lot of acreage, you can cut out a little piece to say, we're not gonna sell you, you know, this little bit of space. This is where mom and daddy are, but in a neighborhood, I don't think the HOA would probably agree with that, but, yes.
So if a family chooses cremation and the body's put in a box or urn,
Mm-hmm.
and they decide that they want to bury it in a cemetery,
Mm-hmm.
so that cemetery would make a decision about the requirements of putting those ashes. And do they require a vault for?
Again, most perpetual care cemeteries are gonna require, an urn vault, which of course small, but still a vault. They actually make, this is one that we use a lot, it's a little marble, square urn, comes in several colors, but it, suffices as an urn and a vault combination. So, it's not very big and it's not very expensive. But if you had some other type of maybe larger urn that you had purchased, that would have to go in, like a wooden box, you know, some type of wooden urn would have to go into a separate vault. But a lot of the church or even like city cemeteries like Edgewood, they wouldn't really have any requirements regarding what can be buried, what cremated remains can be buried in.
Carol, I know First Pres and Emmanuel Lutheran, I think, have columbariums.
Right.
Are there any other churches on?
The Catholic Church has one, the Episcopal Church.
Yeah. So there are a good number of columbariums in.
Right. I don't know of any, because Main Street looked at putting one in a couple years ago and we decided not to. But yeah, I think those are the only ones. And then of course, you've got the niches at Oakbrook and Memorial Gardens both have mausoleums that have the smaller spaces for cremated remains.
Yeah, a friend of mine from medical school was a doctor up in Westminster, and he actually started a kind of a natural burial place up in that area.
Yes, it's called, we were just there a few weeks ago. The name's not gonna come to me, but yeah, in Westminster, there's a green cemetery is what it's referred to as. But yeah, you cannot do any embalming, no type of chemicals or anything like that, no type of, metal casket, anything. It's gotta be all natural, something that's biodegradable. We've even done people wrapped in a blanket or a sheet, or we've used, like a wicker type casket that you can get. I think they have like maybe rocks that the marker, they can have the name put on maybe a rock or some natural looking rock or
If there's a
something.
marker, it's
Right.
engraved on kind of a natural rock. And we had somebody that was, she was cremated
Mhm.
and then was,
Right.
her ashes were placed there
Mhm.
without any, you know,
Any kind of urn or
urn
anything,
or anything like
just the
that.
cremated remains put into it.
Yeah.
Right.
And then somebody else who was buried up there, I think it was in kind of a cardboard.
Mhm. Yeah, anything like that, right, that would go back to natural, back to the earth, right? That's something like I said, we were just there a few weeks ago with a gentleman. So it is something that people think about, and most of the people I think that think about it, it's more of the green, you know, the no chemical things is what draws them to that type of cemetery. It's not inexpensive. I mean, it's not as expensive, of course, as buying a casket and vault and all that, but some of these things about it are not, so it's not necessarily financial, it's more that the people just like the idea of going back to the earth. Yeah.
Do you rent, urn boxes?
We do have, a few, memento type boxes that, so when we do cremation, if you don't choose any other type of urn, if you don't pick out something, the cremated remains are returned in a black plastic box. But if you don't want anything, or you're gonna do scattering or something, so there's no need to really purchase anything different, but you want the cremated remains present for the memorial service, we've got several, wood memento boxes that plastic box can sit down in for the service, so you don't just see the black plastic box for the
And
service.
then y'all can take that back.
Right, so that we don't rent it, we just use it. But yeah, so you, like I said, with cremation and things like that, there's just so many different options of what you can do, and, I mean, even with burial, you know, you still are transporting a casket, so you're kind of limited in some of the things that you can do, but, and these days with technology, we have so many things that we do with personalization, for families with the register books and the memorial folders, and so many people are doing the slideshows, the tribute slideshows where we upload pictures and put that music, so that adds a lot to a memorial service or a funeral service, but it's just a nice option to add to the service.
You've helped me think about so many things that I would not have thought about, related to funeral planning. And I just kind of assumed everybody in the room would want to have a funeral for themselves or their loved one. But I know sometimes people do choose not to do something. And so I would like to speak in favor of having funerals. It is such a precious time, and I know funeral directors have been just great partners to us as pastors as we're doing that, and just a really caring members of our community. And but the time that I get to spend with a family preparing for a service and then having the service, it really marks an important point for folks, and a healing moment for people. So I want to encourage that for us. It's a wonderful thing when we get to come into the sanctuary and remember the time that people have spent there doing other things, and can, as we say it, we completed our baptism, right? Our baptism is complete. And so there's a wonderful bookend to that, knowing that we belong to God from beginning to end and forever after, in life and in death. So we need to affirm those things. As you said at the beginning, it's a time to not just, we want to comfort the family, want to celebrate that life, and then we want to affirm our faith in an everlasting future. So, absolutely. So, any other questions for Carol before we let her go? Let's pray. Lord God, we give you thanks that you are indeed watching over us, holding us from beginning to end and beyond. So Lord, we give you thanks for those folks who put flesh and blood on that love you pour out on us. I give you thanks for Carol and for the Harley Funeral Home and the other funeral homes in Greenwood who provide that care for families when it's really hard to know what the next step is. So thank you for these guides through hard times. And Lord, we thank you for every breath you've given us to take. We pray that we will use those breaths to honor you, to glorify you, and to be a blessing to those around us. Lord, help us be a part of blessing folks as they make a transition from one part of life to another. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all so much for the opportunity.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Carol.
Oh, and my card is in the back of